So the TCG ban list was released today. A little late, but better late than never. And once again, it was a pretty good list, though it was honestly not far enough. And that's really how all the recent lists have been for the TCG. So all the hits that they did, or moves, were pretty good, but they needed to do more of them. So looking at each of the hits, the first one, Glow Up Bulb, went to 1, which is really kind of funny because there's no difference between 1 Glow Up Bulb and 3 Glow Up Bulbs. Nobody's going to play more than 1. So Glow Up Bulb is the best splashable tuner in the game, and it's probably fine to come back. It's definitely a good card in his borderline, but it's probably fine, especially compared to the new decks, which are all kind of ridiculous. Infernity Archfiend was moved from 3 to 1, and it's probably overkill. The Soul Charge hit, which is coming up, is enough, really, to hit the deck, because Soul Charge at 3 was what made the deck stupid, but I really don't like the deck at all, so I really don't care that they hit Archfiend, so I'm totally fine with that, but it is a bit extreme. Raigeki was surprisingly moved from 0 to 1. This is honestly kind of dumb, just because you should have 3 Dark Holes before you have any Raigekis. That really doesn't make any sense to have any Raigekis before you have maximum Dark Holes. But Raigeki is probably not going to see any play at all, because it does the same thing effectively as Dark Hole, which sees no play at all. In terms of gameplay, this hit really has no effect. So even though it's kind of silly, it's fine. I don't really care. The next hit was probably the best one. They moved Soul Charge from 3 to 1. It might be sacky at 1, we'll have to see. But the main problem with Soul Charge was the decks that abused it, and the only decks that really ran 3 were the ones that abused it. The decks that used it fairly would only run 1, maybe 2. Decks like Infernities and Sylvans, which made the card ridiculous, were the ones that played 3 copies. So I think at 1 it'll probably be fine, but it might have to go to 0. We'll have to see how it ends up playing out. And then the next hit, another one I personally think is a really great hit. They moved Super Poly to 1. Super Poly was one of the main problem cards with the Shadow deck, along with BLS and the on-theme stuff. But the fact that you can't respond to Super Poly makes it just way too ridiculous of a card. It was pretty stupid in the Shadow deck. And this was the main hit I was hoping for the deck, because I didn't think Konami would be willing to hit any direct on-theme stuff this soon after the set was released. So this is definitely a great hit. Next, they moved Gale up from 1 to 2. And that's a good move. Gale really is not threatening at all at the moment. He's a good splashable card, and it's a good on-theme card for the Blackwing deck, which can have all of its cards and still not be relevant. They should have honestly moved Gale up to 3 before they moved Kalut up to 3, because Gale is a much better designed card. I personally like the card myself, and I think it's a good move, but they really should just move it to 3. Moving it to 2 before going to 3 is kind of pointless, but that's how Konami likes to do stuff for some reason. Next, they moved Gorz from 1 to 2. I personally don't like this. I think Gorz is one of those cards that should just stay at 1. It's not good enough to be banned, and it's too good to be at higher numbers. It doesn't really see very much play at the moment, but it's basically just a meta call whether or not Gorz will see play in any given deck. The current top decks don't really mesh well with Gorz, which is basically why it's not seeing play, not because it's not good anymore. I will admit that it isn't as good as it used to be, but this is kind of a situation where I think they should move Tragodia up to 3 before they move Gorz up higher than 1, because Tragodia is a much more fair card than Gorz is. Tragodia is also just more skillful, because Gorz you just drop when their highest attack monster attacks you directly. You don't have to think about it. Tragodia you have to think about dropping when you'll get the most attack from it, or when you'll be able to make the most use of its stealing effect. So it's a better card to have at higher numbers, in my opinion. And then they moved Ceasefire up from 1 to 2. I don't like burn decks, but this is probably fine. Ceasefire is a pretty it's a pretty fair card compared to some of the other burn cards, so no big deal there. It's probably fine at 3, honestly. And then the Transmigration Prophecy, they move from 1 to 2, which is a good move, but once again, this should just go straight to 3. There's no reason that it should even be on the list at all. The only reason they did was because you could send it itself back into the deck with the second one and then never deck out, but that's just stupid. Why would you hit a card just because of something that irrelevant? In terms of its actual effects, it's actually a useful card, but it's not hit-worthy at all. It's honestly barely playable. And then the cards, they moved to 3. They moved Cult Soldier Wolfbark straight from 1 to 3, which is interesting. They didn't even bother trying it at 2. This is probably fine. I thought the hit on Wolfbark was warranted at the time, but the top decks have greatly overshadowed Fire Fist, and Fire Fist is honestly a bad matchup against pretty much all of them. I'm kind of thinking now that full power 4X's Fire Fist is pretty much the standard by which we should try to measure other decks by. If decks are too much stronger than that, we should probably hit them to try to get them down to that level. I think that's a pretty good level in terms of promoting fun and interesting gameplay. And then they moved Magician of Faith from 2 to 3, which is obvious. Magician of Faith is terrible. Nobody was playing it. They could have just moved this straight from 0 to 3. And then they also moved Formula Synchron from 2 to 3, which is probably fine. Nobody's actually using Formula Synchron really at the moment. It's probably the best card that they moved up to 3 on this list, but I think it should be at 3. Are fun decks that really, there's no reason to not give them more support. And then last, the best move of the list, they moved Rhoda up to 3. So that's pretty cool. Definitely going to help my ninja deck. So we'll see if 3 Hanzos and 3 Rhodas is good, or if I'll have to play a 4th warrior to try to not dead draw my Rhodas. But that's definitely going to help the deck a lot, and I'm pretty psyched about that. In terms of what the list didn't do, there's a few cards that I think should have been hit that weren't hit. This list is a lot smaller than the list of cards that I think should move up to be at higher numbers. Is BLS. BLS didn't see hardly any play for the longest time, but that was really just because there weren't any light and dark decks at the time. Now that the top decks are all light and dark, they're all playing BLS, and BLS is ridiculous. Ridiculous as it used to be, but it's still pretty dumb. It should probably be banned, even though I think it's a fun card myself. I kind of like it. I think it would be better off at 0. This would also be a good way of hitting the top decks without hitting them directly, which Konami doesn't like to do. Speaking of which, the top 3 decks should have all been hit. In terms of balance, the decks aren't balanced, but Konami doesn't like to hurt their sales, so it was obvious that they weren't going to get hit. In terms of what hits should be done, Shadow should probably have Sinister Shadow Games go to 1. Past that, I'm not sure how to best hit the deck, but it probably would need at least one other card going down to lower numbers. Burning Abyss is even harder to hit. Any hit to Tour Guide would probably be too hard of a hit to the deck, and Tour Guide by itself is considered to be fine, so I really wouldn't like to hit Tour Guide, especially because you can use it effectively in lots of other decks, especially windups if we ever get some Mighty back. The best hit is probably hitting one of the 3 Burning Abyss monsters in the main deck down to 1, probably Skarm. And then for Satellar Knights, I'm also not entirely sure what would be the best hit for them, but I think probably Deneb to 1 would be the best hit. You could still consistently get to Deneb just because you have 3 of the Unukai, or however you pronounce that, to dump Deneb into the grave and then bring it back. But if you only have 1 Deneb, you can actually banish it with Bottomless or DD Crow, and that would hurt the deck a lot. That might be too hard of a hit, but any hit to Altair would be even worse than hitting Deneb to 1. And the only other thing you could really hit would be maybe Satellar Nova Alpha. And then, as far as on-theme hits go, There should honestly probably be a preemptive hit on Clifford Tool to 1, but there's no way that's going to happen. Two cards that maybe should have been hit are Vanities and Skill Drain. Vanities, I'm kind of on the border on whether or not that should be at 1 or 3. Sometimes it is pretty unfair, but it's also a lot more balanced than other lockdown cards, and Vanities does see play in a healthy way in which you just use it once and turn it off. That's how a lot of decks use it, and that is a healthy use of the card. It might be better if we just got a replacement where you could just chain it and stop a special summon in that chain, and then it wasn't continuous, so it didn't stop special summons after that. That would be pretty cool to have. And then Skill Drain is also kind of borderline, but it's kind of one of the best lockdown continuous cards, and it's really dumb in Cliff Forts, so that would be a good way to preemptively hit the deck without hitting anything on theme. So they probably should have hit Skill Drain to 1, I think. And then there's a whole bunch of cards that they could have moved up the list to higher numbers, and it's been this way for a really long time, and there's just more and more cards that can move up with each passing format as the game gets faster and the deck's more powerful. So cards that could move to 1 and then potentially higher after more testing include Stratos, Sangan, Witch of the Black Forest, and then Zen Mighty and Solemn Judgment would both be fine at 1. I would personally like both of them at 1, though those two should not go to higher numbers than 1. List of cards that could just go straight to 3 without problems, and some of these are even banned. So this list includes Dark Magician of Chaos, Sinister Serpent, Tribe Infecting Virus, Yatagarasu. That card is just basically a +1 at this point, because it's without Chaos Emperor Dragon getting rid of all your opponent's cards, it's pretty easy for them to have an out to it. So basically they just lose draw phase if you get an attack through, which is a -1 for them, and then they'll most likely have a response. So I think Yatagarasu would be fine at 1, and if it's fine at 1, it's definitely fine at 3. So, moving on, Thousand Eyes would be totally fine at 3. Dark Strike Fighter with the errata would be fine at 3. And it's worth noting that the TCG version is already errated, even though there hasn't been a reprint with the errata. If you look on the official Yu-Gi-Oh! Database, where they have the official card text for all the TCG cards, Dark Strike Fighter has the errata already. So this card could go to 3 easily. Dragon Ravine could go to 3. Metamorphosis could go to 3. Metamorphosis decks I don't think would be a problem. If they are, you could maybe hit some of the fusions that do cause the problems. Time Seal could go to 3, it's terrible. Exodia could go to 3. Playing more than 1 copy is bad, so there's no difference between having it at 1 and at 3. Though you could potentially just ban one of the parts, that would totally be fine. Spirit could go to 3, though that might require a rooster hit. Deep Sea Diva could go to 3. Birdman and Divine Wind of Mist Valley could both go to 3, though you'd probably have to hit either Ancient Fairy Dragon to 1 or Volcanon to 1 or 0, which are both better hits than hits the Birdman and Divine Wind. Other cards that could easily go to 3 are Bestiary, Grand Mole, Ryo, Goyo, Shien. Those last 3, some people probably might not like at 3, but Ryo and Shien are pretty fair at this point, and Goyo nobody would even play more than 1 copy. Book could definitely go to 3. It's a very balanced trap. Going along with that, Compulse might be fine at 3, but I can see the argument for keeping it at 1. And then the rest of the cards that could go to 3 are all no argument. Gold Sark, Sacred Sword of 7 stars, Soul Drain, Card Trooper, Chaos Sorcerer, Necroface, Reborn Tengu, Summoner Monk, Tragodia, Advanced Ritual Art, and Hieratic Seal Convocation. None of those would cause any problems at all. So, in my opinion, definitely a good list, though it really needs to bump some of those cards up to higher numbers. It's getting really kind of annoying not having some of those. For me personally, I really want to play DMOC. It's a really fun card, and it's not even close to being problematic at this point. It wouldn't see any play at all, to be honest, except for in casual fun decks. So stuff like that's annoying, but good list. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to check out some of my other stuff.